Welcome everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us after a day of probably other Zoom meetings and interactions. So thank you for coming. This is a virtual forum on Proposition EE, otherwise known as the Tobacco and Vape Tax Initiative that will be on the fall ballot in Colorado. My name is Jody Harden. I'm the co-executive director of the Civic Canopy. We're a community-based nonprofit focused on promoting and supporting civic engagement. So being part of this, I'm your moderator tonight, makes good sense with the mission of our organization to build awareness and understanding so we all can make informed decisions about our future in Colorado. So I want to appreciate and raise up the three organizations that are hosting tonight and have done all the coordination around it. That's Urban Land Conservancy, the Neighborhood Development Collaborative, and the Housing Colorado. I want to just go over quickly the format for this evening. We'll hear first from the campaign, from representatives from the Proposition EE campaign, who will share the facts and the background about Proposition EE. Then we'll have an opportunity to hear from the panelists that you see on the screen in front of you. A variety of perspectives around Proposition EE. They'll share their thoughts and reflections. We'll have an opportunity to hear from those of you in the audience, answer some of your questions. So if you look at the very bottom of your Zoom, you see a little toolbar that has participants. That'll show the folks that are participating tonight. Right next to it is Q&A. If you have a question for the panelists, type your question into the Q&A function. Include your name, and if you would like me to just read your question, or if you would like us to unmute you so you can pose your question to the panel. I think that was the big thing for Zoom function. The other thing to know is that we are recording tonight's event so that we can make it available. Since it'll provide a lot of education around Prop EE, we want to make it available in the future. So it is recorded. And we may have a reporter on the call this evening. And I think with that, we're eager to turn it to Cody. Cody, if you would just introduce yourself, and then I know you have a presentation to share about 10-15 minutes worth to give us the background on Prop EE.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much, Jody, and thanks to everyone for making time to be here tonight. I know these are strange times that we are living in, and there are a lot of competing demands for your time and attention. And so I just want to extend my appreciation that you've taken some time out of your evening to learn more about this important initiative. My name is Cody Belsley, and I am a self-professed public policy nerd. I have been working in policy in Colorado for about 20 years. Primarily in healthcare, public health, and early education. And I have the pleasure of serving today as the outreach director for Proposition EE, the initiative that we're here to discuss tonight. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and walk us through just a quick slideshow about Proposition EE, assuming I can get it to work for me. All right, and can you all see my screen? Jody, you're good? Okay, great. Well, I will run through my slides, and if you want to interrupt me with a question, maybe Jody can keep an eye on the Q&A and let me know if there's something burning, a clarification question that we want to address before we jump into the discussion with the panel. So I think it's helpful to talk about these initiatives and think about these initiatives and understanding the broader context in which voters are being asked to weigh in on these measures. So the challenges facing Colorado that are relevant to the Proposition EE debate start with understanding the public health context of this issue. Colorado's teen vaping rate is 29%. We are among the states in the country with the highest rate of vaping, which is sort of surprising and discordant, I think, for a lot of people as we consider ourselves to be one of the healthiest states in the nation. Despite the fact that our teen vaping rate is so high, we do not tax these products with excise taxes at all. Unlike cigarettes and other tobacco products, the existing excise tax is zero. So in many ways, we're really subsidizing the use of this very dangerous and addictive product. At the same time, COVID has created a real financial crisis, not just for Colorado, but globally. But of course, our state's budget is feeling the impact of that crisis. Our K-12 education system is facing $500 million in cuts as just one example of the type of financial impact that COVID is having on our state. Historically, Colorado at the state level has not invested much in the way of resources for affordable housing or for eviction defense. There has been increasing interest in the state playing a more active role in financing housing initiatives, and I know Senator Winter can speak more to the great work that the General Assembly has undertaken in recent years to address access to housing in Colorado, but historically the state has not made it a priority investment area. And then finally, we know that preschool is expensive and hard to find in Colorado. Only about half of our kids get the chance to attend preschool before kindergarten, despite the fact that there is really ample evidence to suggest this is one of the most important investments we can make in closing achievement gaps and ensuring long-term academic success. So the opportunity before voters this year with Proposition EE is to consider a statewide ballot initiative that would close the loophole on the tax loophole on vaping products and establish a new tax on those products, and to increase our tax on other tobacco products like cigarettes and chew to bring that tax in line with other states. This initiative is really designed to do two things. First and foremost, this is a public health intervention. We know that when the cost of these dangerous and addictive products increases, consumption decreases. The research shows that for every 10% increase in cost, you see a 3 to 5% decline in consumption among the general population and a 7% decline among youth consumers of these products. So by increasing the price and investing in public health programs, we can save lives. Secondly, we can generate new revenue to invest in Colorado's future, and at a time of financial crisis when we're looking to slash budgets, state budgets for things like K-12 education, this is a really unique opportunity. So how this works, if approved by voters between 2021 and 2027, taxes will incrementally or slowly be increased. Our current tax for a pack of cigarettes is 84 cents a pack. It'll increase $1.80 to $2.64 a pack. On the vape side, the tax will increase from 0% currently to 62%. I just want to make a quick note on our existing cigarette and tobacco tax. We currently rank 39th in the country in terms of our tax rate. And even with this increase, we'll still be about middle of the pack, excuse the pun, but in the mid-20s in terms of our tax rate on these products. This chart just shows you how the tax gets increased. So the tax on cigarettes and tobacco products jumps in 2021, 2024, and again in 2027, whereas the increase for vaping and nicotine products is a more gradual or slow increase over time. The funding that will be generated from the tax starts with $176 million in total revenue in the first year, and then incrementally and slowly increases as the tax rate increases to about $275 million total once this is fully implemented in 2027-28. The money is spent in the first 2.5 years from 2021 to 2023 to really help Colorado recover financially from the impacts of the COVID crisis. So money is set aside for public schools, mitigating or reducing the cuts to K-12 education, including a specific earmark for our rural schools, which I know is very important to Senator Quorum. I look forward to hearing from him tonight about that. Additionally, there's money in that first 2.5 years for investments in affordable housing and rental eviction assistance defense, and funding for tobacco education prevention and cessation. Starting in 2024 and after, the funding really shifts to focus on preschool and public health programs. This table was actually produced by the Legislative Council, and it's available on page 27 of your Blue Book. We've just reproduced it here in color to make it a little easier to read, but it basically just summarizes what I just said. The funding in the first 2.5 years is invested in K-12 education, this red bar, and the rural schools funding, the orange bar. The purple slice here is for the housing support, and that's both the affordable housing development and eviction legal assistance. And then in 2024 and after, the vast majority of the funding goes to a new universal preschool program and the healthcare and tobacco cessation programs. We know that housing and preschool both are designed to help working families. So the funding for housing totals $35 million over that first 2.5 years. It's $33.5 million for the Colorado Housing Development Grant Fund, $5 million of which is specifically earmarked for housing development projects in rural communities, and $500,000 a year, or $1.5 million total, for the Colorado Eviction Defense Fund. In terms of the preschool money, it's a total of $2 billion over 10 years to fund a universal preschool program to ensure that every 4-year-old in the state of Colorado has access to at least 10 hours a week of quality preschool, with additional funding being targeted to support low-income families and kids who are at risk for academic challenges in K-12 who may need additional hours of preschool. The funding is structured to build on our current mixed delivery system to enable parents and families to choose the preschool that works best for their family, whether that's a public school district offered preschool or a community-based preschool program. We're really proud at the campaign to say that we have a really strong, diverse statewide coalition supporting Proposition EE. There are housing advocates, preschool advocates, K-12 education advocates, civic leaders, business leaders, labor leaders, rural community, front range community leaders. It is a long and diverse list of supporters, all of whom are listed on our campaign's website. We encourage you to check it out. It's an important thing to note that this is one of the things that makes our campaign really different from our opponents, is the authentic statewide nature of the support for this effort. I just wanted to note that we've got, I think it's 29 days until Election Day, and only 5 or 6 days until ballots drop. There are 11 statewide ballot questions and a few very important, highly targeted candidate races, and then all the local questions that will be facing voters. So a lot of people just don't know about Proposition EE, and so one of the things that we really need your help with is raising awareness about this important question and encouraging your friends to do their research before they sit down and vote so that they don't skip over these important ballot questions. With that, I've listed my contact information here on the screen, and am happy to participate in the discussion to follow, but I will stop sharing my screen so that the panel can you all can see the panelists as we pursue the conversation portion of tonight's program. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Great, thank you, Cody. Appreciate that. That was a super helpful overview of both the purpose, the intent, and then some of the mechanisms that Prop E is all set up to support and do. With that, we'll turn to the panelists. We have a nice diverse group of panelists who come at this issue, have been thinking about it quite a bit from their perspective. We'll go around and have each panelist both introduce yourself briefly, and then share with us some of your thoughts on this initiative. Help us think as voters, thinking about this initiative. What are some of the things that you've heard might be keeping voters leaning away from voting for Prop E? And equally, what things are people thinking about? What are the benefits that people are thinking about in terms of voting for? Why might somebody vote for Prop E? So we're looking for holistic responses so that voters are have all the education they need to consider this initiative. I'm going to actually call on each of you individually so you don't have to decide who's next. And I would love to start with Senator Winter. Senator Winter, if you'd unmute, introduce yourself, and then share with us your perspective on Prop E.
Hi everyone, it's good to see you all and good to see my fellow panelists. So Prop EE, I am very happy to support, specifically around the housing piece. And so in the last days of session, when we were putting this on, myself and Senator Gonzalez added an amendment to ensure that there was housing money as part of this program. And the reason that was so important to us is that we know that we're facing a housing crisis, and this isn't just a Denver issue. This is a statewide issue. We know that there are teachers and firefighters and frontline workers all over the state that can't afford housing, and it's just not affordable. And so we made sure that some of the money was going to affordable housing, a significant amount of money was going towards affordable housing development, and also we put in money for the Eviction Legal Defense Fund. So the Eviction Legal Defense Fund was established last year, and unfortunately, because of the coronavirus and what it's done to the state budget, we cut that line item out of the budget. And this restores this program. And the reason that the Eviction Legal Defense Fund is so incredibly important is that the majority of folks facing eviction don't have legal representation. So 9 out of 10 folks facing eviction are going to court with no legal representation, no lawyer. However, the folks doing the evicting almost always have a lawyer. And so this just helps make sure that our justice system is fair and equitable. So funding this right now, especially during the pandemic, when we know that there are hundreds of thousands of Coloradans that could be facing eviction, is really important. So we're helping provide affordable housing across the state. We're providing Eviction Legal Defense Fund. But there's other reasons I'm supporting EE. The first is that my son is 11 years old. And I know that he's getting to the age where I'm sure some of his friends are vaping, and if not this year, in a very short couple of years. And so making sure that we're taking our vaping rate down, especially for our teenagers, is incredibly important to me. It's important to me as a senator, but it's really important to me as a mom, and making sure that we're starting to curb that. And then finally, of course, we need to be setting up every single 4-year-old to enter kindergarten ready to succeed. We know that when 4-year-olds get a good education and they show up to kindergarten ready to learn, the outcomes for the rest of their life are beneficial. And that's some of the reasons I'm supporting EE.
Great, thank you, Senator Winter. I would like to turn to Senator Coram. Senator Coram, would you unmute yourself, share a little bit about yourself, and then your perspective on Prop EE? We can't hear you yet. There we go.
All right. Thank you. It's great to be with the panel. But to let you know, I'm sick and tired of Zoom. That's my whole life is Zoom, and it's I'm looking for normal, whatever the new normal is. I'm looking forward to that. I was rather late to the game on this. This was a bill that came to the Senate, and frankly, it appeared to be in a lot of trouble. And so I was reached out to by several people to try to get it across the finish line. One, I was interested in the housing situation and rural education. And so I decided that I could lend my support to put it before the people to choose. I think sometimes legislators get a little bit hypocritical in that they're not willing to let the people they represent have a vote in it. I don't have a problem on this giving the people a choice. I think there is a need. I think we need to get out of the box as far as our funding for rural education and education in general. Housing in rural Colorado is a huge, huge problem. We're down the road 65 miles from me is the Telluride ski area. It's the #1 ski area in the nation, and actually in North America, I think, right now. And the median price is about $2 million. Well, the person that's the service worker for that industry, certainly they're priced out of the market. So we've got to find housing for them that we can be there, or we will not be able to continue servicing the people that want to come and visit our ski areas. I guess my concern that I've had, that I've heard often, is I don't think a lot of people trust the General Assembly. I think there's a fear that, yes, we'll pass this and then they'll find something else, the flavor of the month, and maybe raid those funds. So I think that's the biggest obstacle we have is developing a trust that, yes, if we do pass this, we're going to fund it. I mean, a lot of people remember back to the days of the marijuana, legalizing marijuana, and how much it was going to do for education. And you know, granted, it has helped education, but I don't think it's helped to the degree that the general population thinks it would or should. That was short and sweet.
Great. Well, thank you. Appreciate those reflections, Senator. I'd like to have Karen, if you would like to unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and tell us your perspectives on
Great,
Prop
thanks.
EE.
Thanks, Jody. My name is Karen Kallenberg, and I am the Executive Director with Habitat for Humanity of Colorado. We have 25 affiliates that are building in 45 communities across the state. You know, our focus around Proposition EE is really very similar to what the two senators just said in terms of the great need we have for affordable housing. We specifically, as an organization, look at affordable homeownership. And as we saw in the presentation that Cody gave, there is going to be funding for this housing crisis that we are currently in and that is being amplified by COVID. So $35 million over the next 3 years. It also, I'm really glad, thank you, Senator Winter, for advocating for that eviction assistance as well. I don't think any of us realized what kind of situation and how much we would really need that, but we are. You know, I'm good with stories versus statistics. So, you know, why are we supporting this? Affordable housing is going to help families like Penny and her 5 children. They were living in affordable housing funding will help them. They were living in a small mobile home. That's all they could afford. They had to move out of that because the rent went too high, and they had to move into a much smaller situation, and they moved multiple times over that year. And now Penny is a Habitat homeowner. She is not worried about her rent going up. She has a stable payment. She also has a place where her family can sit down for a meal. I mean, imagine that again. You're crowded into a situation and you can't all get around the table. Imagine those Zoom calls, right? Senator Quorum, with all those people crowded into a small situation. But she's now in a safe home, an affordable home, a home with a yard, a home where her kids can have room to thrive and grow. So again, why should voters consider Prop EE? I think now more than ever, a home is an important sanctuary for families across our state to feel safe, healthy, and secure. And I will just echo, again, what the senator said. This is not a Front Range issue. This is not just a rural issue or just a resort community issue. This is impacting our entire state. I have the good fortune of traveling across our state, and I can tell you, was in a meeting pre-COVID, Pagosa Springs, and in 1 hour, 4 families came in that were in need of affordable housing. One was living with her children in a tent, one was living in an RV without heat. Fort Collins, a homeowner had to move 15 times in order to be able to find an affordable apartment. No one should have to move 15 times in 8 years. And then in the Roaring Fork Valley, I think, again, Senator Winter mentioned teachers. They're losing teachers. We're losing teachers across the state because they cannot live in the communities that they're serving. And so for us, in a time when resources are very limited and we already had a need, this is going to help to provide more Coloradoans housing, that essential basic need that we all have. Jody.
Great. Thank you, Karen. I appreciate that perspective. And we will go to another person in rural Colorado. Christy, would you like to introduce yourself and share with us a little bit about your perspective and background?
Yeah, hi, I'm Christy from Lake County Build a Generation in Lake County, Colorado. And we're a very rural community, population of 8,000. We are a bedroom community to both Vail and Summit County. And we work a lot on policy interventions that help build community health and well-being. So I think one of the reasons why people might be against Proposition EE is that we know that upstream intervention is much more successful than ending intervention. And what I mean by that is if we can prevent people from smoking at all to begin with, they'll be much more healthy than if we try to stop them from smoking later on down the line. And those initiatives are much more successful. There is an argument that Proposition EE is a upstream intervention for teenagers because if it costs too much, then they won't be able to buy it. But as far as the impact on rural housing, Lake County right now needs 868 additional housing units. That's crazy, right? We're a population of 8,000 and we need 800 more right now. In surrounding counties, that's in the thousands. That's market rate and affordable housing. We're behind the ball. It's an uphill battle, and any single thing that we can get is going to help us address this problem. And same problem with childcare, right? Preschools and stuff like that. There are no licensed child care facilities in Lake County for children under the age of 1. So what happens to those parents? They leave the county. And what does that mean to our economy? That means we're losing valuable workers and important community members. So all of this really ties into the well-being of Colorado in general.
Great, thank you so much, Christy. And next we'll go to Lauren. Lauren, I think you're gonna bring some education and pre-K context in.
Yeah, so my name is Lauren Weatherly. I am the Partner School Program Director for the Boulder Journey School Teacher Education Program, which is a partnership with University of Colorado, Denver. So we work with teachers all over the state and actually all over the world, developing early childhood educators. And our focus is very specifically on early childhood. We're one of the only programs in the state who can say that. And in thinking about kind of what I could bring to this conversation, I think that it makes the most sense for me to share some perspectives about early childhood education that I think not a lot of people know. So Senator Winter, you mentioned that we're facing a housing crisis, and housing is so well represented on this panel. I couldn't agree more with all of these perspectives. We're also facing an early childhood education crisis in our state, in our nation. And I want to build a little bit more on the importance of early childhood. So what we know is that 90% of a person's brain development happens before the age of 5, 90%. That means that children are born with all of their neurons, they're born with all their brain mass, but what's happening is through their early experiences, they're building connections in their brain. They're building neural pathways that create a roadmap for how they will live their life. And the ways in which, children navigate early childhood environments has impacts for academic success, which has been mentioned, and career success, also success in romantic relationships later in life, friendships, family relationships, health and wellness, huge impacts for health and wellness later in life. So if we're talking about a holistic reason for, supporting, barriers to vaping and really trying to go for prevention, early childhood education is another reason. There's also tremendous impacts for families. Going back to March when COVID struck all of us and we started to go into the mode that we're in now, a lot of people with young children really, the world really started to see that, our entire economy is built on the backs of early childhood education. I'm sure any of you who have children of any age really felt that in a lot of ways. And something that I don't think a lot of people understand is that despite the importance of the first 5 years, early childhood education en masse is not publicly funded. So there are some publicly funded, there is preschool in public schools, there's federally funded Head Start, but the network of early childhood in our state is really sort of a hodgepodge of, mom and pop businesses and, nonprofit organizations, along with these kind of publicly funded programs. And the result of that is that it's incredibly, incredibly expensive. So there are some opportunities for example, families who live in poverty to have access to funds for early childhood, but that's very small. And then, you have very wealthy families who can have their pick of any preschool situation. But that leaves everybody in the middle with very few options. And I'm sure, again, that any of you with young children have felt this very deeply. It's very difficult because preschool tuition can be roughly the same as college tuition, just in a year. So creating a way to give all Colorado children access to early childhood education would be an unparalleled step for supporting families, supporting our economy, supporting, also supporting the early childhood education field. Early childhood educators are some of the most brilliant, resilient, and just innovative people out there. And I think that a lot of people maybe don't know too that we're also one of the lowest paid. So on average, early childhood educators make about $15 an hour. These are people with high qualifications, people with master's degrees, people with teaching licenses. But because we don't have a public system, we're not considered equal to the benefits and the pay that teachers in public schools are getting. So in addition, creating this new system would sort of prop up our entire industry. And what we saw with COVID is COVID has impacted many early childhood preschool businesses' ability to stay alive. Doors are shutting, people are leaving the field. We talked about teacher shortage before, and teachers are just massively exiting the field. So what we have is an early childhood education crisis that has been exacerbated by COVID. And so in addition to all of the reasons that have been cited, creating a way to say, as Coloradans, we believe that early childhood matters and we want to support all of our state's kids in this way would just have unparalleled benefits. So I hope that people support it for these and all of the other reasons.
Great, thank you, Lauren. And with that, Jonathan, would you like to introduce yourself and share your perspectives?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Jonathan Capelli with the Neighborhood Development Collaborative, which is a coalition of 17 nonprofit housing organizations working across the spectrum from people suffering from homelessness and also homeownership. So, as far as why people, maybe wouldn't support this or might be afraid of supporting this, I think we get into a little more in when I saw the second question. But I think it's just important to remember that this is a tax on tobacco products and that the funds take or get that or received from that are essentially used to benefit smokers in terms of health benefits from not smoking, downstream. So that's a positive part of it. But and I don't want to go right back into housing, but I'm about to. But I will quickly say, to Lauren's point, child education is a huge part of this, and there's actually an interesting connection with housing, wherein the greatest indicator of student absenteeism, it turns out, is housing instability. And so when you stabilize families with safe and affordable housing, that directly improves their educational outcomes, and especially in the time of COVID with people moving around a lot, and potentially a lot of families moving once the eviction moratorium ends at the end of the year, it's really going to be important to stabilize everyone, but especially families, which is why the Eviction Defense Fund is so important. But to quickly, sort of base this in facts, although I also agree with Karen, facts are sometimes, not the most effective vehicle education. But before COVID, there were about 580,000 homeowners and renters that paid 30% or more of their income on housing. So 27% of Colorado households. And if you look, and then for those who are spending 50% or more of their income, that's almost 300,000 homeowners and renters. So we live in one of the fastest growing housing markets in the country, the second fastest gentrifying metro area, according to a National Income Housing Coalition, the ninth most expensive state for housing when you adjust for income, and the 10th most expensive rural housing market as well. And since it costs the same amount of money to purchase land and develop a building for affordable housing as it does for market rate housing, but you receive less income per unit, you really need, the state really needs to step in and facilitate these public-private partnerships to allow for the greater and more rapid development of affordable housing. And this is really important, to Christy's point, in smaller jurisdictions, in rural Colorado, where land costs are still incredibly high, but municipal funds are comparatively low. Today, the state has about 30 million in dedicated state revenue that goes to affordable housing. There are other funds that were approved in previous years, but they've kind of been cannibalized and postponed in part because of the budget deficit and other reasons. So that's kind of what we're dealing with now. In comparison, Denver has the same budget, about 30 million for just Denver. So, distributed across the entire state really waters down its potential impact, which is why we need more funds. This is also important given the pandemic. So those are pre-pandemic stats. We needed more housing funding. It's even more important now. About 24% of renters and 6.5% of homeowners expressed in the Census Pulse survey last month that they had slight or no confidence in their ability to pay this month's rent. And nearly 15% of renters said they couldn't pay last month's rent. We also know, to Senator Winter's comments about the importance of legal defense, it's only about 8% of renters that currently receive legal representation when they go to court. So for the most part, they're unrepresented. And we know that when there's funds to provide legal representation, outcomes are much better. And that's going to be really important in the upcoming months. Given all the above, I think that voters are feeling intuitively, that we're not doing enough to fund affordable housing, and that it's essentially worth the cost of a tax on an unhealthy product that is being overused, by children in particular. So those are my comments for now. Sorry for going so long.
Great, thank you, Jonathan, and thank you to all the panelists. It was interesting listening to all of you. When I first looked at Prop EE and I saw the list of where all the revenue could go, I thought, wow, will voters see that as just a varied list of random things? Or will they see the interconnects? And Jonathan, I think you started to knit the interconnects together with some of your comments. And I saw in the Q&A, Aaron Maripol, you posed a question or a comment around how some of these things intersect to create community health. Would you be willing to unmute yourself and ask that question to the panel?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you all for taking time. Yeah, so there's been a lot of studies and data out there regarding the direct correlation between affordable housing and quality education. Jonathan, I think you mentioned something about the fact about stability, housing stability, and why that's a critical piece. And so I guess I just would be curious with this, with EE, can we communicate a stronger message about how housing and education really they have to be tied in? You guys have all alluded to it, but there's some really good data studies out there, and I sent a link to one that was done by the National Housing Conference a few years back. But again, I think that to me is a critical part to this conversation as well, is that we need both. We need quality education, we need those resources, K-12, and then obviously as it goes to preschool going forward after 3 years. But linking these dollars together is really, to me, is a really important message. So I guess it's less a statement rather than a question, but I am asking to see if we can mirror those, make that a stronger case in the next 30 days.
So here, Aaron, I would, this is Cody Belsley with the Prop EE campaign, and I would say that we at the campaign would love to help create that platform and use that platform over the next 30 days as a springboard for ongoing future work to make these connection points. So let's be in touch about what our, how we can use the campaign's website, social media platforms, letters to the editor, op-eds, other opportunities that this campaign provides to shine a light on those connections. And to the point that Jody and Jonathan were making, that, we're talking about all the same families. right? The families who need help with housing are the same families who need help with early care and education, and they need that support in a holistic way, because while we tend to fund government in silos, that's not the way people live. That's not the way people experience poverty and insecurity and challenge. And we need to be, I think people get frustrated with politics because we're so disconnected, we're so deep in our silos, we fail to see those connections and to talk about these issues in ways that resonate with people's real lives. So the campaign would love to help provide that platform, and we should have that conversation.
Well, Aaron, this is Senator Quorum. I think civility is a huge ingredient on success in our young people's lives. So having a safe home to go home to, sit around the table so you can actually have dinner together and communicate as a family, I think is very important. So, you know, anything we can do on this to get these young people a hand up. I don't believe in handouts, I believe in hand ups, and I think that's what this is.
Great. Thank you, Aaron. We have another question from participants. Will the funding for eviction defense compensate for the amount that was cut? And I think Senator Winter, we might start with you on that.
Sure. So we had $1.5 million in our budget. So it does cover that. However, this is a new program. We had only implemented the Legal Defense Fund last year. So we're seeing what the demand is, while at the same time, once the moratorium runs out, we're worried we're going to see an increased need. And so there might be a greater need for the program than what we funded, but it does replace what we had proposed in the budget before we came back into session after COVID hit.
Great, thank you. Any other panelists or?
Well, I think we have a lot of unanswered questions because, you know, this next year's budget is a total crapshoot. You know, we were 3.3 billion short, you know, and, you know, we took a lot of one-time funds that we could get, but those aren't going to be there this year. So we're totally dependent on how fast that we do come out of this, this situation. You know, the legislature is a land of unintended consequences. And, you know, sometimes we create situations that, that don't help. So if we're doing that, we need to recognize that and move in a positive direction.
Maybe somewhat linked to that, a question came in from the audience around what's the thinking on the switch from the initially focusing the education funds on K-12 education for 3 years and then moving it into the preschool realm and funding preschool. Would anyone like to, who would like to start with your understanding on that or perspective?
Everybody jump at the same time. So, you know, I think that is the question that's the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Because frankly, we cut the education budget by close to $600 million. We backfilled that with CARES funding, but I don't see that being there next year. So we have a lot of situations that we're going to have a lot of wants and a lot of needs, and the needs are going to win out over the wants. So thank God I'm not on JBC.
Go ahead, Laura.
Well, I was just going to say, I can't speak to the development of the history of the legislative decisions that you all make, but I can speak to, you know, I believe there is some money going to the K-12 general fund, and then the particularly to rural schools, so that backfills a little bit. But I think from an early childhood education perspective, like, we're not necessarily choosing one or the other. We're catching early childhood up to where we could be and should be to be providing these benefits that are going to impact children's K-12 experiences. So I have a lot of empathy for the tough decisions that our legislators have to make. You know, and I follow these processes as much as I can. And I know it's difficult. You have to choose one thing or the other. Sometimes I think when you look at the benefits of early childhood education, they're so massive that I would imagine, I would hope that that went into that decision.
And I can speak just a little bit to the process and sort of how we ended up here. So this initiative actually started as a citizens initiated measure. A group of early childhood advocates and health advocates came together last year to start working on this, and they had gone through the Secretary of State's process to take this to the ballot as an initiated measure. And then COVID hit, and it became very clear that it would either be prohibitively expensive or impossible to gather the signatures necessary to qualify this measure for the ballot. And so they took it to the legislature. And it was through that legislative process that the measure was shifted from a solely public health and preschool initiative to something that could also help the state address the worst impacts of the COVID, the worst financial impacts of the COVID crisis. And that's where the money for K-12 education and for housing got added in. And frankly, I think it helps to strengthen the final proposal that's going to voters by acknowledging the very real crisis that we're facing in terms of the financial challenges facing the state. I think just a couple of quick points on the education funding. We're working really hard to be very clear so that we don't create a problem like was created with marijuana, Senator Coram, about unrealistic expectations for what this funding can do. The money in Proposition EE for schools is really intended to mitigate the cuts that we know are inevitably coming to schools because of the financial crisis resulting from COVID. There is just not enough revenue available through a tobacco tax to systemically address the funding shortfall facing our K-12 education system. But we can build a really meaningful universal pre-K program with the revenue that is available here. And so the way this is structured, it allows us to mitigate the worst financial impacts for K-12 education in the short term and build a really solid universal pre-K program moving forward.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that, the history, and then also bringing it up into the current context. Thanks so much, Cody. I'm going to pivot to the second question for the panel. Participants, if you have, we hope we'll have another round of participant questions, so keep putting those in the Q&A. So panel, what would you say to folks, to voters who say, to those who fear that this tax will result in a disproportionate fiscal impact to the state, and most importantly, to specific demographics of tobacco users, to communities of color, especially during this time of COVID? So when you think about that, folks who are wondering about, ooh, is this gonna hit disproportionately the state and communities of color tobacco users? How would you respond to that? And Christy, we have a couple panelists who have to leave early. Christy, did you say you wanted to start with this question?
Yes, thank you. And I did want to say thank you for including me in this panel. It's been really fun to listen to everybody's different perspectives, and I feel honored to be included. So we know that the tobacco industry targets youth and lower socioeconomic status community members, right? We know that. We've heard that for the last 30 years. And so, yes, we do know that any kind of tax is going to impact the people who are hurting the most. But I would say on the flip side, we also know that people who are on the cusp of making that decision, they want to quit, but they need that little push. There's facts that have proven that a tax increase can be that little push that they need. And really what it comes down to is the overall health of our community. Tobacco use is killing people just as poor housing and other stressors are causing heart disease and diabetes and things like this. So I think in general, if you pull back and realize that this is a public health crisis, it does kind of balance out that potential for fiscal harm to those who are already struggling.
Great, thank you. Senator Coram, I see your mute is off. Would you like to respond to this one as well?
No, I'm sorry, I was just listening. I agree that I think that it is a bit of a deterrent. I'm not sure it's as big a deterrent as some would like to think, because, you know, frankly, a lot of 13-year-olds think it's really cool to vape. And so somehow we need to expose to these children that, you know, I'm very concerned about the health issues, the lung infections and everything that come along. And I don't think we promote that enough to parents to sit down and talk to their kids about this, because this is a temporary cool that could affect your health the rest of your life.
Great, thank you. Any other panelists want to respond to this? How you've thought about or talked with those who are worried that this might disproportionately impact fiscally communities of color?
I think, yes, the deterrent impact is really important, but also where this funding goes was very purposely designed to support communities of color. And so when we look at who's going to benefit the most from making sure that we have universal pre-K, who's going to benefit the most from increased education, increased housing funding, increased eviction legal defense, and it's a concern that I had about this initiative, honestly. And then when we worked really hard as the legislature to weigh out where this money was going, for me, the decision was that the benefits are going to outweigh that cost.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. You know, the population that tends to smoke does skew lower income. However, people smoke across all incomes, so it's definitely not just people of color and low-income populations. I was talking to the panelists earlier before we all got on about how there was a similar bill that Obama put out back in 2000, I think 13, 14, and 15 that didn't get through each time. But essentially, it was the same thing. It was an excise tax on tobacco products, and the revenue was supposed to go to expand preschool programs. So even though it's technically, regressive, and taxes like that are often looked down on, many think tanks and experts weighed in and said that they supported it because it wasn't truly regressive, because the population that pays the tax actually benefits most from the tax through health programs and increased funding for early child education, which disproportionately helps low-income people, which might be disproportionately affected by the tax. So it all kind of comes together. Reducing smoking rates leads to substantial health gains for those populations and all populations. So essentially, there's this thing called the benefit principle, which is where taxes that people pay should translate to benefits and services they receive. I don't abide by that principle all the way across the board, but in this case, I think it's really important because that's exactly what's happening. This population is being taxed, and it's not exclusively, but they're going to be the primary beneficiaries of these programs. So I know Cody has some great facts about the number of smoking, that how the rate that decreases over time when you increase the price. So there's just a lot of benefits to this that I think undercut any arguments about its regressivity. Yeah.
I think you all said it beautifully. Just the one piece that I would add to this is builds a little bit on where Christy started, which is just to say that there is ample evidence to show that for decades, the tobacco industry has exploited low-income communities and particularly youth. There was a study released in August that showed that low-income neighborhoods in Denver are twice as likely to have vape and tobacco shops in their communities as high-income neighborhoods, and that 50% of Denver public schools are located within 2 city blocks of a tobacco or vape shop. And it is that same tobacco industry who for years has engaged in predatory marketing practices to try to addict low-income and youth consumers on their deadly products who are now running the opposition to Proposition EE and running a campaign against Proposition EE based on the fact that it is a regressive tax. And I just think we got to pause for a second and acknowledge that this industry that has exploited these communities for decades is now running a campaign telling them to vote no because the tax would be exploitative. It's just, it's rich in irony.
I just want to add, I agree so much with everything that all of you have said. And, you know, I think another piece that's important in thinking about, you know, why people might vote no on this. I mean, honestly, I worry about something anything on the ballot in Colorado that says the word tax in it, because in Colorado, I don't like to vote yes on that stuff. So I hope people understand it. But another piece that's important is that unless I'm mistaken, vape products currently are not taxed at all, right? So, I mean, that's another place where it's, and I know that this measure includes an increase on tax, a tax increase on already taxed products, but just the vape products, which we're so concerned about right now for all of the negative health impacts and social impacts, that's just a catch up. Right. So I think that's, you know, that's another potential reason to support it, where it's like, why are these products not taxed at all? And doesn't it just make sense to catch them up at least? So.
Thank you. And I saw that there were a couple of questions. Wayne, would you be willing to unmute yourself and ask the panelists your question directly? Would that be okay? There's Wayne.
There it is. I didn't see the unmute button. I had a couple questions, just real quick. What's that? Can you guys hear me? Okay, so my first question basically was concerning the eviction. I've got quite a few friends I know that actually do rent out houses, both affordable and market rate throughout Colorado. And I've heard pushback from them as far as the different situations involving evictions. And so I was curious, has anything been proposed as far as eligibility for getting eviction protection?
It is a means tested program. So you have to show that you cannot afford a lawyer on your own. And this isn't weighing the process in favor of the tenants. It's just making sure that the process is fair and equal in terms of legal representation.
Okay. And then along that same lines, as far as eviction, I noticed when the housing development grant, so I work for the Division of Housing, and so I was pleased to see that housing development grant, which we use quite a bit of that for our loans and grants. Has anything been proposed as far as rental assistance, such as housing choice vouchers, or would that be part of that allocation for that money coming from the taxes?
As far as I know, and maybe the senators can weigh in, but my understanding is that it's about 11.16 or something, a little over 11 million a year that is going to the housing development fund, affordable housing development fund, and there's no specifics on how it would be used within that. And I think that means it's going to be targeted towards development. And then separate from that is the $500,000 a year or so for the eviction defense. I didn't see anything earmarked for direct renter assistance. The other programs, the POP program and the EHAP program from the CARES funds, I think those are covering that. Although those are going to run out soon, and we will need more funding, I think, for those programs after the end of the year. So that's a super good question. I haven't seen anything to fill that gap yet.
Awesome. Great to hear. Thank you.
I do think there is, just to pick up on what Jonathan said in terms of the funding, I did read in the legislation that there is a set aside of at least 1/3 for under 30% area median income. And so those are generally very low income neighbors that are in need of support. And that generally is around around rental or homelessness support. And then I do believe that there is also a priority of $5 million for our rural communities in terms of affordable housing funding as well, which I think we've made the case for that as well. The need is being statewide and wanting to make sure that we are honoring that with our funding.
Both of you are right, and what I would just offer is we do have a housing specific fact sheet about Proposition EE that if it would be helpful, I'd be happy to distribute it or share it with ULC, and maybe ULC could share it with everybody who's participated in tonight's event. And it's just got a little summary recap of what's in the legislation specific to housing, in case that would be helpful to anyone.
Oh yeah, by all means, and I could share with people I've worked with. Thank you.
That'd be wonderful.
Great. Thank you, Wayne. And then Mark Marshall, if you're interested in unmuting yourself, the panel welcomes you to ask your question. Let's see, we'll give Mark another minute.
There.
There we go.
Yeah, just got the prompt on mute, thanks. Yeah, so I work with Aaron and at ULC here. One thing we've explored in the past was how we might be able to link early childhood education with some of the development partners that we work with. We do a lot of TOD development with affordable housing developers, and oftentimes they use the low-income housing tax credits for these developments. And in their modeling, they are creating mixed use buildings. Upper floors are residential, generally ground floor commercial space. And many times they're struggling to find tenants for that commercial space on the ground floor. My question is kind of around this scenario, what do you think would be the likelihood of these types of funds being dedicated toward helping to build out, the tenant improvements or supporting early childhood education centers in affordable housing developments at TLD stations?
Go ahead, Cody.
Oh, I was wondering if I muted myself.
I was just gonna say I love the creativity. Taking off my campaign hat for a second and putting on my personal hat. I'm the former chair of the board of Mile High Early Learning, and so worked closely with Pamela Harris and was part of those creative conversations that ULC and Mile High had together. And I love the creativity, right? I mean, I love the idea that when you put dollars on the table and you bring collaborative partners together, community solves these problems in really innovative and terrific ways. And I guess what I would say is I don't think that there is anything specific in EE that encourages that kind of innovation. But I also think that it's oftentimes through these types of campaigns where these kinds of connections and collaborations can be fostered and supported. And certainly failing Proposition EE isn't going to do anything to help that. So from a sort of general perspective, I would say I think we're better off if EE passes to enable that kind of collaboration and support than we would be if it failed, even though I don't think there's anything specific in the legislation to enable that.
I agree. I think you have to ask a lawyer about whether or not. So, the funds are delivered, to the Housing Development Fund. A portion of it is broken out by AMI, just like what Karen said. I forgot about that. But how the funds statutorily can be used, some of them can be used for services, but can they be used for non-residential construction costs if it overlaps with childhood learning? Don't know. And then the question is, does that take a legislative change, or is there some sort of administrative change that DOLA or DOH, the Department of Housing, could make in terms of how it allocates those funds and what qualifies as like a service? I don't know, but I think that to both your point and Aaron's point, talking about these things together is really, really going to be key moving forward. The bill, if you just look at the text, just lists these things which seem like they're unrelated, education and, let's throw housing in there. and health too, but they're not. And so hopefully this is the first step as we move forward towards thinking about these more collectively. But for now, it's up in the air, like Cody said.
So thank you. So I have one more last question, and to do a round robin with the panel. So as a voter, I'm thinking about, or I'm talking to my partner who's thinking about all the various elements that are on my ballot this year. There's a lot. It's a big ballot. There's other big initiatives, from family paid leave to Gallagher Amendment, et cetera, et cetera. What's your last thought on how you would talk to me as I'm thinking about it, or talking with the other people in my household about Prop EE on a big, important ballot? Karen, can we start with you?
Sure. I would just say that there is a lot on the ballot. I know I've been highlighting my blue book for several days now, and I haven't gotten all the way through it just to make sure I understand everything. I think, the important thing about Prop EE, I'll go back to housing. That's what I know. Again, there are so many barriers right now in our state to affordable housing, and there's so many needs. And Prop EE is the one initiative that's on the ballot that is actually going to provide resources for housing, which I think, again, will impact our entire state. It's a statewide problem. We can vote across the state for this and provide funding. And I just think, I hope that it doesn't get lost, or we even talked earlier, or misunderstood, right? That we're all doing our due diligence to attend meetings like this, as well as read those thick blue books.
Senator Coram, how about you? Last thoughts from you.
Well, I'm just going around presenting it to people, and I'm saying this is a situation that you need to assess the situation and vote your conscience on this, because I think if you really, in my district, housing is really important, and so I think that's a huge factor in it. And I've kind of become Switzerland on this, because I know there's a lot of people that have drawn a line that this is not what it is. I think it's very misunderstood, and somehow I think we need to clarify what it's actually doing, and we've only got about 3 weeks to do that.
Great, thank you. Jonathan, how about you?
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so there's 11, I think, initiatives that are on the ballot this year. And, sometimes it seems like there's a zero-sum game where it's multiple, things competing for, like, increasing the sales tax, et cetera. It's not really happening this year because there's a measure to decrease the income tax, I believe. And then there's the Gallagher Amendment. So, I think this can be considered by itself without having to think about the cumulative effect compared to other bills, for the most part. Even if the Gallagher Amendment, gets repealed, which I think would be a good thing for education and a lot of other programs too. The people who aren't smokers wouldn't, get hit. It wouldn't be a cumulative, additional tax if you're not a smoker. And even if you are a smoker, as we learned earlier, it's, this is a 22% total tax rate compared to Connecticut, which was a 200%, tax rate. So it's just, I don't think that it really matters compared to the, even though it's a full ballot, there's no cumulative, negative effect of them all being stacked together. This is independent and independently good. So I would just say, ignore that noise and vote for what you think is best. And we would recommend this one.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. Lauren, how about you?
Yeah, let's see. I would say, obviously we've gone through a lot of benefits to this tax. I just can't see a downside to this. So just, recapping the benefits for early childhood, this funding supports, all of Colorado's young children. It supports, you know, all of Colorado's families that have young children. And, you know, we talk a lot about in early childhood, we say, you know, like, think about if you have a young child, okay? So maybe you don't have a young child. Do you work with somebody that has a young child? Probably. Literally every single person in the state is impacted by access to early childhood education. And then when we combine it with the impacts to housing, we're talking about systemic benefits. We're talking about systemic change. And during a time when, you know, the pandemic has caused a lot of difficulties and hardships, and, you know, we're feeling that in such a strong way. So we're providing these support systems for people who need it, but above and beyond that, we're providing benefits for everybody in our state through this. So I just can't imagine the downside. I just can't see it.
Thank you, Lauren. And Cody, how about you? Any final words from you?
Yeah, I'll take off my my paid campaign hat and put on my private citizen voter hat. I happen to be a Democrat, but I was raised by a long line of proud Republicans from Southern Ohio. And the way that I talk about the work that I do with them is that this isn't about Republicans or Democrats. In a year in an environment that is so polarized and that is so negative, and it feels like everything in politics today is a zero-sum game, this is a win-win, right? This is good for health, it's good for kids, it's good for education. And I think that is borne out by the really broad and diverse coalition of supporters across the state who are yes on EE. You know, we've got labor and business, we've got rural and front range interests, we've got health stakeholders, early childhood stakeholders, education stakeholders, civic leaders, faith leaders, just people from all different backgrounds and walks of life. And really the only groups who are opposing this are the tobacco industry. So at the end of the day, I think this may be one of the easiest questions on the ballot, in that it truly is a win-win scenario. And we hope very much that tonight's event helped to educate you about that and to earn your vote and to earn your support. I just want to make a plug that our campaign website is forcokids, forcokids.com. I encourage you to check it out. And I also am a big fan of the Blue Book. I think the Blue Book did a great job on this initiative. And so if you still have questions, feel free to reach out to me, feel free to connect with the campaign or refer to your Blue Book.
Great. Well, a huge thanks and gratitude to all of the panelists for sharing your perspective, your passion, your time this evening. Thank you again to the organizations who hosted this educational event. Urban Land Conservancy, Neighborhood Development Collaborative, and Housing Colorado. And last, thank you to all of you who joined in at the end of the day, listened, became more informed about Prop EE. So appreciate your time and attention. And everyone stay well, be well, and be ready to vote. Thank you all. And we will send out the recording. So if you want to share this with others in your household or in your network, please feel free. Thank you all so much.
Thanks for facilitating, Jody. Thanks, everyone.